Allah. طيب inshallah we're going to get started now. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد أشرف الخلق وسيد المرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما واجعل علمنا حجة لنا لا علينا. اللهم ارزقنا حبك وحب نبيك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم واجعل محبتك ومحبة نبيك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم محبة تنجينا بها يوم الدين. اللهم ارزقنا اقتفاء أثره، علمنا من سنته وعلمنا من كلامه ما يصلحنا وما ينفعنا في دنيانا وفي أخرانا. اللهم ربنا إن زدنا علما، اللهم ربنا زدنا علما، اللهم ربنا زدنا علما. اللهم أصلح أحوالنا وأحوال المسلمين والمسلمات في كل مكان. فك الكرب عن أمة حبيبك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم في مشارق الأرض ومغاربها. يا غياث المستغيثين، يا مجيب السائلين، عجل بالنصر والفرج القريب لأمة حبيبك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. يا الله كل عبادك المستضعفين في فلسطين وفي غزة انصرهم نصرا عزيزا مؤزرا. اللهم فك الكرب عن إخواننا المستضعفين في لبنان وفي اليمن وفي العراق وفي مصر وفي بورما وفي كشمير وفي سائر بلاد المسلمين. أنت أعلم به منا كلهم ناصرا ومعينا ومؤيدا وظهيرا. أبرم لأمة محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم إبرام رشد يعز فيه أهل طاعتك ويحكم فيه بشريعتك يا رب العالمين. اللهم آمين، اللهم آمين. وآخر دعوانا الحمد لله رب العالمين. أما بعد, I ask Allah Azza wa Jal to bless this gathering by the blessings of mentioning Al-Habib Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam in it. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to teach us of the Quran and of the Sunnah, that which makes us better people, that which transforms our character, that which influences our words and our attitudes towards things and situations. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us a people who deeply love their Prophet. May Allah Azza wa Jal grant us a profound understanding of him, of his seerah, of his legacy, of his sunnah. And may Allah make that the defining factor for us in our guidance and in our salvation on the Day of Judgment. Allahumma ameen. Allahumma ameen. Amma ba'd. We've been living with this series, commentary on as-Saliheen. And last week, we went over a chapter on spiritual exercise, or was that the week before? Last week was hope and fear. Chapter on hope and fear. The week before was chapter on spiritual exercise. Today we have a few chapters coupled together, and that is the chapters on da'wah and advice. And I'm going to try to couple them together in a creative and thoughtful way. If you're following along with the book, the as-Saliheen, the commentary I'm using, which is the commentary of Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabahani, I'm going to be looking at page 62. So you could turn to page 62. And if you don't have that book and you want to have something in front of you, one of the sections I'm going to be going over from the main as-Saliheen is باب الدلالة على الخير والدعاء إلى الهدى أو ضلالة. Right? So that's the second. باب الدلالة على الخير. In the English, or I should say in the abridgment of Shaykh Yusuf al-Nabahani, he rearranges the contents of as-Saliheen and repackages them. For him, before speaking about da'wah, he speaks about knowledge. He tries to follow, or he follows, I should say, because he's a great scholar himself, he follows the path of Imam al-Nawawi in teaching us to look beyond surface level, to words to their meanings, to thoughtfully put together and piece together things in a way that's actionable. If I'm going to give da'wah, what do I need to have? I need to have knowledge, right? If I'm going to give da'wah, I need to know what da'wah is all about. It's about true nasiha. It's about truly preserving the best interest of the one you're addressing. Da'wah is not about sharing information, right? I'm going to repeat that one more time, just so we're on the same page. If I'm going to give da'wah, I need to have knowledge. So that's why he speaks about knowledge first. If I'm going to truly understand what da'wah is about, I need to understand the concept of nasiha. Because nasiha, which we translate as advice in Islam, is all about seeking the best interest of the one addressed. Da'wah is at its worst when it's reduced to information. Da'wah is at its worst when it's reduced to mere information. It's an art form. It's about using creativity along with your sincerity to penetrate the hearts of people, right? I'm going to say that again. What is the driving force that allows words and actions to penetrate the hearts of other people? Ikhlas. We learned that. One of the recipes for the greatest da'wah, one of the equations that is essential in good da'wah, ikhlas. And that's why you might find someone have very little knowledge and information, but has a unique and supreme level of ikhlas and sincerity. Allah allows this person's words to penetrate hearts of people. It happens. It happens. That's why they say, مَا خَرَجَ مِنَ الْقَلْبِ وَصَلَ إِلَى الْقَلْبِ. That which truly comes from the heart of a person penetrates the hearts of people. Allah Azza wa Jal has given special barakah and goodness to the words of Ahl al-Ikhlas, right? Because their words are not empty, they're not shallow, they're not disingenuous, they're not for ulterior motive. So if you were to have a da'wah workshop that needs to involve addressing the state of our hearts before we give da'wah, the state of our minds before giving da'wah, right? Again, because the worst thing there's two sides to this, and I'm hoping you guys are following along with me. The worst thing I could do with my da'wah is to give da'wah with ignorance. Jahl, ignorance, is this big deterrent for people away from guidance. Someone who is empowered to speak and has no true understanding. I'm not talking about having encyclopedic information, right? Because someone might have encyclopedic information but still be very ignorant. Because for us, knowledge is not information. Knowledge is more than that. It's about knowing the application of that information. That's what knowledge is. So, one of the worst things that could be found in da'wah is da'wah with ignorance. It deters people away from truth. It turns people away from Allah Azza wa Jal. And that's why wisdom is needed. Wisdom is this, there's this beautiful definition. So since I mentioned ignorance, what's the opposite of ignorance? Right? You might say knowledge. Well, no, I'll say something more than knowledge. Wisdom. We have jahl and then we have hikmah. Right? The essence of what jahl is ikhtilalul mawazin, is to not know how to properly place things, not know the proper placement of things. Things are in disarray. That's the essence of ignorance. I don't know the status of parents. I don't know the status of Allah. I don't know the weight of my words. I don't realize the impact of my actions. That's ignorance. Wisdom, on the other hand, this beautiful definition they say, it is عبارة عن إحكام وضع الشيء في موضعه. It is to know how to properly put everything in its proper scale and balance. In another definition, they say it is فعل ما ينبغي على الوجه الذي ينبغي في الوقت الذي ينبغي. It is to do what needs to be done the way it needs to be done at the time it needs to be done. Right? These are all things that are needed for wisdom. So da'wah needs wisdom. The other side of this, so that's one side of it. Worst thing you could have is da'wah with ignorance. The other thing you have, the most ineffective, or I said the most thing that would make da'wah ineffective is lack of genuineness, lack of sincerity. It's the thing that makes da'wah very, very ineffective. Nasiha is all about being sincere. Nasiha, that's why all these things relate, by the way. Nasiha is not advice. It's way more than advice. It's way more than advice. Someone who's a true nasih, a true person who embodies the concept of nasiha in Islam, is someone who really, really cares about human beings. And that's what prophets were. They were utterly sincere to their mission. They dedicated their lives to people. Right? The Quran describes this. Right? If I want to be a good da'i and understand the da'wah of the Prophet ﷺ, understand this. The Prophet ﷺ is described in the Quran, وَلَقَدْ نَعْلَمُ أَنَّكَ يَضِيقُ صَدْرُكَ بِمَا يَقُولُونَ. We know that your chest becomes tight because of what they're saying. Why does it become tight? Because we know that you're so disturbed by what they're doing to their own selves before they do anything to anyone else. لَعَلَّكَ بَاخِعٌ نَفْسَكَ أَلَّا يَكُونُوا مُؤْمِنِينَ. Perhaps, O Muhammad, you may bring yourself ruin because of what? Because of them disbelieving, right? So, in another sense, the best da'is are the ones who carry the greatest empathy and compassion for creation. The best da'is, the best callers to the path of Allah, the best callers to the path of Allah are the ones who carry the greatest empathy and compassion towards creation. They're the ones who are going to care. Right? It's not about me giving a speech and leaving. That's not what it's about. It's not about me standing at a da'wah table and talking. It's not about me proving my point or debating. Da'wah was never about, subduing your opponent in debate. Yeah, sure, there's a dimension for debate in da'wah. I'm not saying there isn't one. But it's not about subduing your opponent. It's not what it's about, right? It's about winning hearts of people. The Prophet ﷺ, his entire story exemplifies to us good da'wah. People fell in the orbit of Muhammad, they fell in love with him. That's who the Prophet ﷺ was. But I need to have something to offer people, right? Being sincere by itself is not enough. Yeah, it'll get you a long way, and that's why you might find someone. The Prophet ﷺ said, بَلِّغُوا عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً, right? نَضَّرَ اللَّهُ امْرَأً سَمِعَ مَقَالَتِي فَوَعَاهَا, right? Maybe someone only knows a verse and is more effective about convincing people to believe in that verse than someone else who has an encyclopedia worth of information. Yeah, that's possible. Sincerity will get you far, but it won't get you far enough. Because after I'm able to capture that audience, I need to give them something. As we learn in Arabic, there's this wisdom that says, فَاقِدُ الشَّيْءِ لَا يُعْطِيهِ. فَاقِدُ الشَّيْءِ لَا يُعْطِيهِ. Someone who is void of something cannot give it. So for this reason, I need to invest in building my skill set in order for me to actually be able to take my da'wah to another level. That's important. It has a significance to it. So that's why, we learned this from our spiritual masters of the past. Among them is Sidi ibn Ata'illah as-Sakandari. He says, ادفن وجودك في أرض الخمول فما نبت مما لم يدفن لن يتم نتاجه. He says, no, there's merit. I need to build my skill set. I need to work on, building my knowledge base and my understandings. Because the more that's properly done, the more I'll be able to give a complete product in my da'wah. That's needed. Don't rush to grab a mic and talk. That was never the directive of our religious and academic and spiritual tradition. It's not about grabbing a mic and talking, right? So what does he say in this wisdom? He says, bury yourself in the grounds of anonymity, for that which sprouts without properly being buried will not produce a good product, right? Again, this little cryptic language, but what does it mean? Bury yourself in the grounds of anonymity. What does anonymity mean? I'm being anonymous, right? I don't need to be prominent and prestigious and well-known from day one. I need to focus on me, focus on my heart, focus on my mind, focus on learning, focusing on connecting with the Quran and with the Sunnah. And then when I do sprout, quote unquote, I'll be able to produce something really good. That's something that we learn from our tradition. So let's look at what he says on page 62. And then I'm going to go to the other sections. So in the very beginning, it says on the virtue of seeking knowledge, ilm. I don't want to make that the entire talk because again, I want to speak about the subject of knowledge from the standpoint of da'wah and advice. Standpoint of da'wah and advice. So I'm going to give a little bit of it and see how the contents, the hadiths relate to this subject. Because there's a lot we could say on the virtue of seeking knowledge. Allah mentions it in many verses of the Quran. The first verse He mentions, are those who know equal to those who know not? قُلْ هَلْ يَسْتَوِي الَّذِينَ يَعْلَمُونَ وَالَّذِينَ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. And then He says another verse, Allah will exalt by degrees those of you who have attained faith and those who have been granted knowledge. Allah will raise them in ranks. Right? Now, will Allah raise the ranks of someone who has a ton of information? This is not talking about ton of information here. Right? That's why we learn from our tradition, al-ilm al-khashya. True knowledge, ilm nafi', is the one that leads to amal salih, that leads to righteous behaviors. True knowledge is the knowledge that makes my heart humble and submissive to Allah. That's true knowledge. Not a lot of information, necessarily. And that's why there's so many hadiths here. Like he mentions a few of these. He says, مَن يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. Who Allah wants goodness for, He'll give him a profound understanding of religion. And he mentions on page 64 the other hadith. I'm going to jump around in this section. He says it is narrated from Abu Hurairah that the Prophet ﷺ said, whoever follows a path seeking knowledge, Allah makes easy for him a path to paradise. If I was to translate it, there's another narration that says, Allah will facilitate for him by way of it a path to Jannah, right? By way of that seeking knowledge. Whoa. So this path of knowledge is actually a path, is cognizant, is symbolic of a path to Jannah. That is what the spiritual pursuit of knowledge looks like. The spiritual pursuit of knowledge looks like. Now, I'm going to go back to page 63. In this section, and this is how knowledge translates to da'wah and activates us to call. This hadith that he shares on the bottom of 62 into 63. Look at this beautiful hadith. He says, the Prophet ﷺ said, the guidance and knowledge with which Allah has sent me are like abundant rain which falls on the earth. A fertile part of it absorbs the water and brings forth a profusion of plants and grass. Another part of it is solid ground which retains the water, whereby Allah makes it a benefit for people. They drink from it, irrigate their crops, and sow their seeds. Another part of it is a sandy plain, which neither retains the water nor produces plants. The former is the similitude of the person who attains deep understanding of the religion of Allah and benefits from that with which Allah has sent me. Thus he learns it and teaches it to others. The latter is the similitude of the person who ignorantly and stubbornly pays no heed and accepts not Allah's guidance with which I have been sent. Right? Now, this needs a little bit more clarification. What are we talking about here? What are we talking about? What is this example of 3 different responses to rainfall? I'm going to say it in my words. It's right there in the wisdom of the hadith. 3 responses to this rainfall. One response is this fertile ground took the water in, it nourished the ground, and it benefited itself. The ground benefited, and then after the ground benefited, people benefited, because that ground became into plants and crops, and then the vegetables and fruits and greenery. So the soil benefited and the people benefited. And that's what knowledge must translate to. It must transform me, and it must have its impact on others. The second response to this rainfall is just a vessel that carries the water. No fertile ground at all. I'm just going to carry this water for others to benefit from. I'm going to be a pool of water. People are going to come by, take from it, nourish themselves. As for the earth itself, no benefit at all. Ya Allah. Nasallah salama. Allah Azza wa Jal tells us about, and He warns us by this, right? He warns us by this. Allah Azza wa Jal tells us about the people of Scripture before us. He says, مَثَلُ الَّذِينَ حُمِّلُوا التَّوْرَاةَ ثُمَّ لَمْ يَحْمِلُوهَا كَمَثَلِ الْحِمَارِ يَحْمِلُ أَسْفَارًا. Right? Allah Azza wa Jal says, the example of those who have been given Scripture, and they then do not dutifully carry it are like the examples of donkeys that are carrying volumes and volumes of works. Right? Imagine when you had travel back then, and they needed to travel, they'd use a donkey or a mule or something, and you put a library on top, or you put a bunch of books on top of the donkey or the mule. Is putting the donkeys, the books on the donkey going to make the donkey smarter? Allah Azza wa Jalla is giving us an example. Is that going to make it smarter? Is downloading a library to my computer going to make me smarter? Is buying 1,000 books going to make me more capable? Nope, it's not. This is not the way it works. So Allah Azza wa Jalla is giving us an example here of those who've been given a great responsibility to carry the light of guidance. You're O Ummat Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. That's why Allah Azza wa Jalla warns us. أَفَتُؤْمِنُونَ بِبَعْضِ الْكِتَابِ وَتَكْفُرُونَ بِبَعْضِ. Do you believe? ثُمَّ أَنْتُمْ هَؤُلَاءِ. Allah Azza wa Jalla says in Surah Al-Baqarah, He says, are you really going to be the ones who tell people أَتَأْمُرُونَ النَّاسَ بِالْبِرِّ وَتَنْسَوْنَ أَنفُسَكُمْ وَأَنْتُمْ تَتْلُونَ الْكِتَابِ? Are you going to tell people to do goodness and then forget yourselves in the process? It's a very scary thing. That's the second response. It's a very scary thing. For me to learn a lot and then remain bankrupt on the inside but say all the right things to everyone else. Ya Allah, may Allah not make us like that. So these are three types of people. What's the third response to this rainfall? Heard all the information, did not benefit a single thing, and I benefited no one. No benefit for myself, no benefit for others. So this is an attitude towards knowledge. Knowledge is meant to, and this is why the first generation spread Islam far and wide. For them, Islam was not about books, was not about classes, wasn't about universities. It was about activating them to transform the world around them. Not to say that universities or books are bad. No, I love that stuff, right? But the first generation was so great because their knowledge activated them. And it made them transform the world around them, right? They went, that's why, when Islam spread to North Africa and parts of Asia, the companions spread with it. They didn't stay in Mecca and Medina. They throughout the land. That's why you find the graves of the companions spread in many different countries, right? Many different countries. So that's a perspective on da'wah. I need to learn. And I need to realize this path of knowledge is a very spiritual one. And when I truly embody this spiritual path of knowledge, it'll make me an effective da'i if that knowledge also transforms me. If that knowledge transforms me. I can't just learn and that's it. No, it needs to transform me. It needs to change the way I think about things and deal with people and situations. Look at this beautiful, Prophet ﷺ directs us, hey, look, we are an ummah of da'wah. We are an ummah of da'wah. We are an ummah of da'wah. SubhanAllah, some people, Allah inspired, they give da'wah with every inkling of their being. They care. It's always on the top of their mind. May Allah reward them and bless them. Because they realized the great reward in it. Look at this hadith, the next hadith on the bottom of 63. The Prophet ﷺ said to Ali, by Allah, for Allah to guide a single person through you is better for you than having red camels. Humr na'am. It's a metaphor for something very, very, very precious and valuable. Something rare, something very expensive, right? In their times. That's if Allah was to, look at the understanding here, right? Who guides? I guide, you guide, Allah guides. And the more I realize it is Allah doing and I am a pawn that He directs in this kingdom, the more that idea of sincerity will settle in, right? I want to be used by Allah. That's why, one of the common prayers of believers is what? Allahumma sta'milna wa la tastabdilna. Oh Allah, use us and don't replace us. Allahumma sta'milna wa la tastabdilna. Oh Allah, use us and don't replace us. Right? I realize that it's not about me, right? And I'm easily replaceable, right? So look at this next hadith. shows us how the companions, their attitudes was towards da'wah. The Prophet, it's top of page 64. Prophet ﷺ said, transmit from me, even if it's only a single verse, and relate from the children of Bani Israel without restriction, but anyone who deliberately lies about me, let him take his place in the fire. This is a scary hadith. بَلِّغُوا عَنِّي وَلَوْ آيَةً shows that, do I need to be a scholar to carry the message of Islam? No. بَلِّغُوا عَنِّي, right? بَلِّغُوا عَنِّي. How do I convey about Islam? Like if someone was to ask that question, how do I convey about Islam? What are the different ways that people convey it? Don't tell me social media and through what avenues am I communicating this message of Islam? How would you answer that question? One is by actions, right? With my amal. This is among the most effective da'wah. And this could be direct or indirect, right? So by actions and by, you're going to say actions? How am I communicating this message of Islam? How am I communicating? All right, the way, actions. So the way I present myself, actions. Of course, the obvious is with the tongue. What other avenues do I channel and communicate what Islam is to me and how it transforms me? Not just my actions and my tongue, but also what? People are very observant, right? I need to be mindful of this. I communicate the message of my deen even with my attitudes. Even with my attitudes and my perceptions of things and of people and of situations. And subhanAllah, I've heard this from many people. When people know the before and after, they see how special, when people know the before and after in you, what Islam has done to you. I remember one brother wording it like this, people who knew him before he became practicing and then saw him after he became practicing, the observation was, it seems like this religion of yours has done something to your mood and your temperament. It's given you this weird sense of calmness. What is this Islam? And it makes them wonder. It just puzzles them. What is this sense of peace? You used to be this, rowdy, aggressive, loud, obnoxious person. How has Islam caused you to quell and calm down, right? Well, I hope Islam does that to me. I hope my Islam changes my perceptions and attitudes. But people are very observant, right? They can even notice the peace that has overcome you and wonder what's its source. So these are channels I communicate this deen. I don't need to be a scholar. This is evidence. Every person in their workspace, in their dealings with their neighbors and their dealings with their families, if they have non-Muslim family members or if they have non-practicing family members, all of this communicates and channels what this deen. I don't want to be a highway robber. You guys know what a highway robber is? I don't want to be a highway bandit. That when someone sees me and what I'm about and how I look at things, they want to run for the high hills from this religion of mine. I don't want to be like that. These people may grab me by the neck on the Day of Judgment. Ya Allah. He was a Muslim and he showed us all the most awful and deplorable things about this religion of his through his attitude, his perception, his behaviors, his words, everything horrible. Why do I say highway robber? Where did I get that from? They mention this in this books of Tazkiyah. They say that there's this concept of قطاع الطرق عن الله عز وجل. There are the highway bandits that cut people off from the paths that lead to Allah, right? There's this beautiful statement of one of the companions. He says, I believe it's Abu Darda. He says, إن أحب العباد إلى الله الذين يحببون الله إلى خلقه. You know who's the most beloved to Allah? Those who make Allah most beloved to the hearts of people, right? Those most beloved to Allah are the ones who make Allah most beloved to the hearts of people, right? So there is that. These are channels of communicating this deen, right? And the rest of the hadith goes on to give clear warning. Hey, look, be very careful. Be very, very, very careful. This hadith is actually, they say it's mutawatir. If any hadith was mutawatir, and that's like, that's something that's been mass transmitted by such a large and plethora of people, that it's beyond reproach, right? The end of the hadith says, وَمَنْ كَذَبَ عَلَيَّ مُتَعَمِّدًا فَلْيَتَبَوَّأْ مَقْعَدَهُ مِنَ النَّارِ. This is a principle that drove the companions to operate in a certain way when it comes to dealing with the words of the Prophet ﷺ. It says, and whoever deliberately lies about me, let him take his place in the fire. You know what? This made the companions very careful. What am I going to say about Islam? Am I going to be quick to answer questions? No, I'm going to think once, twice, and thrice. I'm going to know my limitations. All right. I know that there's certain things I could address, and I know there's other things. I don't want to be the one who leads to misconceptions in the minds of people. I'm going to be very careful with that stuff. Right. What's the reward of giving da'wah? You want to know the reward of giving da'wah? Look at the hadith on the top of page 65. It says, it's also narrated from Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala anhu that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, whoever calls others to guidance will have a reward equal to the reward of those who follow him, without that decreasing their reward in any way. Right? Hadith says, من دعا إلى هدى كان له من الأجر مثل أجور من تبعه لا ينقص من ذلك من أجورهم شيئا. There's another hadith that's similar to this. Right? There's another hadith that's similar to this. That says, من سن في الإسلام سنة حسنة فله أجرها وأجر من عمل بها. Right? So setting a standard by giving da'wah, like with your actions, with your words, with your perceptions, with your mannerisms, gestures, everything about you, right? If you do that, the greatest reward in that is you'll get the rewards of everyone following suit and doing the same thing that you're doing. It's massive reward. This is, and he refers to this in the wisdoms of the hadith. Look at the hadith that he mentioned. I'll say the next, I'm talking about the wisdoms of the hadith on the bottom of 65. Before he shares that wisdom, he tells us another hadith, because it's in the same line. We refer to this as sadaqah jariyah. What is a continuous charity? A continuous charity, sadaqah jariyah. Something I should be looking for. If I'm going to give a charity, I might as well try to give a charity that's continuous, right? Because the other type of charity is going to end. Not to say that any charity is bad. No, charities are good, no matter what form they come in. But a continuous charity, yeah, that's something precious. That's something that when a person's in his grave, he'll continue to reap the rewards and benefits. That's why someone who has the opportunity to actually invite people to Islam and then passes it up is someone who's not thinking of the moments he's going to spend in his grave, right? How can I continue to live for me, myself, and I, and realize the great reward that would benefit me most when I'm all alone in my grave? I'm going to want a good companion. You want a good companion in your grave? Give da'wah. You'll get a good companion. Look at the hadith that says here. He says in the 65, he says that Abu Hurairah narrates that the Prophet ﷺ said, إذا مات ابن آدم انقطع عمله إلا من ثلاث. When a man dies, his actions are cut off except three things: a continuous charity, sadaqah jariyah, knowledge, which is beneficial, or a virtuous son who supplicates for him. These are all avenues of da'wah, by the way. When we think of da'wah, sometimes we think of sitting with a stranger who doesn't know a thing about Islam. That's one avenue of da'wah, and it's a very virtuous thing. You know what's another avenue of da'wah? Something that's not very glamorous, right? Giving da'wah to family sometimes. That could be difficult. Trying to have hard conversations with parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, cousins, whoever else is in your sphere that may not necessarily be a willing listener to you. That's a form of da'wah. Again, the waladun salihun yad'u lah. This is a form of da'wah that parents give their children. The big struggle of raising a child that believes in Allah, right? It's a form of da'wah, right? These are da'wah. That's why, what does the Quran say about this? The Quran says that Sayyidina Sayyidina Ismail was وكان يأمر أهله بالصلاة والزكاة وكان عند ربه مرضيا. He enjoined upon his family prayers and charities, and he was someone who will be pleased by his Lord, right? وَأْمُرْ أَهْلَكَ بِالصَّلَاةِ وَاصْطَبِرْ عَلَيْهَا. Enjoin upon your family to establish prayers and be patient and exceedingly patient in doing that, right? So when I think of da'wah, I need to broaden my horizons. It's not just about information. It's about genuine love and care and sincerity with people. It's about compassion. It's about empathy. But it needs knowledge. When I think of da'wah, it's not just about my words. It's not about giving people lectures. It's about my perceptions, my attitudes, my gestures, my mannerisms, my behaviors. All of this are channels for da'wah. When I think of da'wah, it's not just about sitting with a stranger. It's about me giving da'wah to my family. It's about me giving da'wah to my children. It's about me looking for avenues of continuous charity, right? Because that's the greatest reward in da'wah. That I will begin to find this multiplying factor to my amal salih. I inspired this human being to learn Surah Al-Fatiha. I inspired this human being to love the Quran. I inspired another human being to learn about the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. I inspired this other human being in their time of need by giving them good counsel and advice. Why on earth would I turn my back on opportunity? These are all opportunities to give da'wah. Giving good counsel and advice to a person in a time of need. Being someone who's there to give some support to someone who's afflicted. Being there to give some knowledge and direction to someone who needs knowledge. All of these are forms of da'wah. The forms of da'wah are so many. And this is what these hadiths are also broadening our horizons to do. Now the last hadith, we mentioned this hadith in our Friday forum this past week. It's on page 66. It gives us direction and understanding about what happens when knowledge is lost, right? So we said that beyond knowledge is wisdom. And what's wisdom to knowledge? What's wisdom? What's wisdom? Are you guys with me? All right, what's wisdom? Properly putting everything in balance, and another way I worded it was it's the application of knowledge. How is wisdom different than knowledge? Question mark. How is knowledge different than wisdom? Question mark. How is wisdom different than knowledge? Question mark. Answer: wisdom is the application of knowledge, the proper application of knowledge. So we learned about wisdom, we learned about ignorance, and we learned how destructive ignorance could be. This last hadith tells us what happens when knowledge is lost. And you'll find this in tons of futile debates. This is one of the things, especially for people who are newcomers to the religion or newcomers to practice. Pay attention, pay attention. People who are either newcomers to the religion or newcomers to practice of the religion. Because of ignorance, you will find so much futile debating in those initial stages. Totally unnecessary things that derail people, right? That's why there's this beautiful quote I've mentioned in the past. They say that العلم ثلاثة أشبار. The knowledge is marked by 3 milestones. Knowledge is marked by 3 milestones. Knowledge is marked by 3 milestones. من بلغ أوله تكبر. Whoever arrives at the first of these milestones will become arrogant. What does that mean? I know everything. I figured everything out, right? I looked it up for 5 minutes on Google, or I watched a YouTube lecture on it, and all of a sudden I become the master of all knowledge, and I can debate and prove my point over anyone. These are innovations, and these people are misguided, and if you don't do this, you're going to go to hellfire, and if you don't do that, endless nonsense. Endless nonsense, right? من بلغ أوله تكبر. Whoever arrives at the first of these milestones will become arrogant. He will think he knows everything. ومن بلغ ثانيه تواضع. And whoever reaches and arrives at the second of these milestones will be humbled. And whoever reaches the second of these milestones will be humbled. Because I'll realize, whoa, there's so much more to knowledge than meets the eye. And whoever arrives at the third of these milestones realizes that he absolutely doesn't know. عَلِمَ أَنَّهُ لَمْ يَعْلَمْ. He absolutely doesn't know. What does that mean? It means that when I compare my knowledge to the vast knowledge and endless knowledge of Allah Azza wa Jal, I realize how insignificant I am, and how insignificant my knowledge is to His Subhanah. So He tells us in this hadith, truly Allah does not take away knowledge by snatching it from the hearts of people. Rather, He takes away knowledge, and I'm looking at page 66, rather He takes away knowledge by taking away the scholars. Until not a single scholar remains, then the people will take ignorant people as their leaders. When they're asked, will deliver answers without knowledge. Thus they'll go astray and lead others astray. He mentions this in the section on knowledge, and he couples it with the hadiths on da'wah, teaching us how dangerous it is to do these types of behaviors. All right. Everything in the Quran, when I look at the verses of the Quran on da'wah, look, he mentions in the original as-Saliheen, and you find this on page 67, which is the next lesson, the section on leading to good or giving good advice and nasiha, right? And setting a good example and a good practice. He mentions verses. ادعو إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة والموعظة الحسنة. Invite to the way of your Lord with wisdom and good instruction. That's where we already talked about wisdom. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the unique nature of the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He says, وَلْتَكُمْ مِنْكُمْ أُمَّةٌ يَدْعُونَ إِلَى الْخَيْرِ. Let there arise out of you a group of people inviting to all that is good. And then he tells us what da'wah is truly about. Da'wah is not about divisiveness. It's about togetherness. وَتَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. He says, and cooperate in righteousness and fear of Allah, but do not cooperate in sin and aggression. There's a lot of, it's so interesting how he includes this verse in the section with the hadiths on da'wah. Think about this. Cooperate with one another in righteousness and in taqwa, but do not cooperate in sin and aggression. If only we could reflect on what's beyond the words of this verse. The greatest and best climate for da'wah is one that's divided. Yes? No? The greatest climate for da'wah is one that is in harmony. There's peace. Peacetime is the best time for da'wah. Proof. The most profound proof. Peacetime, and when things are amicable and good. When hearts are together. Right? You know what's the worst thing for da'wah? For there to be hatred, animosity, and division between the hearts of people. It destroys communities. It turns people away from the masjid. And it causes a lot of insecurities. What's the most profound evidence that peacetime is best for da'wah? How would you answer this? What's the most profound evidence? Something so obvious in the legacy of our Prophet ﷺ. The Treaty of Hudaybiyah? Okay. So what's the evidence in that? Okay. You're onto something there. I want you to rewind a little bit though. Hudaybiyah happened in the 6th year after Hijrah. What is it? Hijrah. How many Muslims were there before Hijrah? While the Prophet ﷺ was still in Mecca? Approximately. There was dozens. You would count them in the dozens. There wasn't many. After Hijrah, exponentially rised. And then when you go after Hudaybiyah, as you said, exponentially rised. To the extent that when it came to Hajjat al-Wada', you had, some say, upwards of 100,000 companions in front of the Prophet ﷺ in the farewell pilgrimage. Whoa. So when there was so much difficulty and tension in the days of Mecca, that wasn't good for the, I'm not going to say it wasn't good for the da'wah, but it required a certain caliber of people. It did not allow the message to spread far and wide. Why? Who's going to accept to be tortured to death and brutalized, and who's going to accept that? It takes a rare breed of people. It takes a rare breed of people to embrace the fact that they're going to be disowned by their families, which is something, by the way, many of our brothers and sisters who accept Islam have to deal with, right? Who's going to accept the fact that disowned by family, excommunicated by all of your social circles, changing your culture, if you have to change your culture, who's going to accept that? Rare breeds of people. Not the typical person is going to accept that for themselves, right? But what happens when you have a community embracing it and cultivating Iman? Exponential growth, exponential growth. You went from a few dozen to thousands to tens of thousands by the time the Prophet ﷺ left this dunya. So it's interesting how he mentions that verse, cooperate. Da'wah needs cooperation. Da'wah needs cooperation. Worst type of da'wah is the one, the worst da'wah is the one that acts as a cancer upon the people. The worst type of da'wah is the one that divides the hearts of people and makes people at each other's throats and hate each other. That's not what da'wah is supposed to do, right? Go on, next section. The hadiths on page 68 are similar to the one that we already shared. Like for example, مَنْ دَلَّ عَلَى خَيْرٍ فَلَهُ مِثْلُ أَجْرِ فَاعِلِهِ. Whoever guides someone to perform good will have a reward equal to the reward of a person who performed that good. Now, by the way, this concept of ta'awun, we need to think about it. You know, how can I activate this concept of, because like look, when I'm thinking of da'wah, I may be thinking of it from the standpoint of Muslim to non-Muslim, right? But no, that's not always the case. We have da'wah, we have in-reach and outreach, right? We have da'wah from Muslim to Muslim, right? Part of this da'wah is for me to share the knowledge that I've learned. Like, you know what good da'wah could look like from this type of class? If I learned something in the Tuesday class and I have friends who don't come to it, maybe I could share with them a few doses of this knowledge. Instead of wasting my time in my hangouts, talking about futile matters of dunya. Oh, vacations, nice cars, nice houses, all those other types of things that litter people's, free time, right? Maybe I could incorporate something good in that type of conversation. That's a form of da'wah. That's actually part of what the companions did. We had Sayyidina Umar radiallahu anhu. You guys know Sayyidina Umar al-Faruq, right? One of the Prophet ﷺ's right hands. When you think of Sayyidina Umar, you would probably imagine someone who always shadowed the Prophet. He was always there with the Prophet ﷺ. But was that the truth? It wasn't actually the truth. Sayyidina Umar had a life of responsibilities and work. He actually teamed up. He used to live on the outskirts of Medina. And he teamed up with his business partner, who was also his neighbor. You know what their arrangement was? Because they had to operate their business. They agreed that they would alternate. One of them would work, the other one would go be in the presence of the Prophet to learn from the Prophet ﷺ, and then the next day they would switch. Right? Why would they do this? So the one who was in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ for that day would come back and inform the other one what he learned. Right? It's beautiful. Wallahi, it's beautiful. Like so, Sayyidina Umar was very keen on not missing anything from what he could possibly learn from the Prophet ﷺ. So he had this arrangement. I'm going to work and I'm going to have my business partner alongside with me in this pursuit of knowledge. When I miss something, he's going to come and tell me. And we're going to share it with each other. That's a beautiful form of ta'awun ala al-khair. That's a beautiful form. You know, you might want to call it a study buddy or, a talab ilm buddy or whatever you want to call it. But we need this. We need this type of, this type of camaraderie in the pursuit of knowledge and spiritual growth. That's why our righteous predecessors, they would say to one another, Hayya nu'min sa'a. Come together, let's sit down and reflect and strengthen our iman for an hour. Let's talk about iman. Let's have a reflection circle. That's something that needs to be activated in everyone's social circle, and everyone needs it at some level. So that's a form of da'wah. When I share knowledge that I learned with my friends, the greatest the greatest form of betrayal is for someone to betray those nearest to him or her in sharing with them the truth. That's one of the greatest forms of betrayal, right? So if I have this beautiful deen that's transforming me and my life, and those closest to me never get an inkling of that goodness and never get to experience it, wallahi, it's a shame. Wallahi, it's a shame if I act as a Muslim in this space here, and as soon as I leave it, I want to disassociate with everything that makes me look Muslim. I don't want to even be seen as a Muslim. I'll even change my name to go under the radar. I don't want my friends or my coworkers or the people with me at school to realize anything about my Islam. That's a form of betrayal. I'm going to, and one of the manifestations, scary manifestations, may Allah forgive and better us, one of the scary manifestations of this is if I'm praying in the masjid every single day, first row, very devout, very practicing, and then my own direct family don't know a thing about Islam. Why am I cheating them? Why am I betraying them? How could I accept that I'm in the first row and then my own son or my own daughter doesn't know anything about Allah? I shouldn't, or my own siblings or whoever it is. It doesn't, may Allah forgive us. But again, that's why in our own rights, every single one of us should be a da'i, should be an inviter, right? If I'm not an inviter to goodness, I'm an inviter to wickedness. How am I inviting people to goodness? And so then the hadiths go on. So the most referenced hadith for setting examples is this hadith on the bottom of 69. This is the one I sort of referred to earlier. This hadith says what? Whoever establishes a good practice in Islam, he'll have the reward for it and the reward of anyone who practices it after him, without that decreasing their reward in any way. And whoever establishes a bad practice in Islam, he will bear the sin for it and the sin of anyone who practices it after him, without that decreasing the sin which they bear for it, right? So that's the hadith that's most referenced. And in this regard, what they often note is the sin of murder. That's on the first murder ever committed by one of the two sons of Adam, right? Qabil and Habil. When Qabil killed Habil, what happened? The Prophet ﷺ said, no soul is unjustly killed without responsibility for it falling on the elder son of Adam, because he was the first to establish the practice of murder, right? And then he mentions the verses that relate to that. Now, how else do I give da'wah? This is an interesting one. Can you give du'a? Can you give da'wah with your money and your? Can you? You can't. It falls under actions, but again, it's not like your typical type of action. That's why it's worth noting this last hadith that he shares here. So when you think of actions and da'wah, what do you think? I'm gonna feed the needy and or give the needy or feed the poor. I'm gonna help someone elderly, or I'm gonna clean the pathway. These are nice actions. They're good da'wah, right? I want to give the good da'wah. What am I gonna do? I'm gonna clean up the neighborhood, right? That's good da'wah, right? And these are good forms of da'wah. But how can I make da'wah in the business place? How can I make da'wah in the business place? So, look what he says in this last hadith. The Prophet ﷺ said, the honest Muslim trustee, the khazin, who carries out what he is ordered to do fully, generously, and cheerfully, and pays it to the person whom he was ordered to pay it, is one of the givers of charity. He's one of the mutasaddiqeen. I'll tell you something else. So he mentions one hadith that makes us think about da'wah and money. Right? So he's telling us someone who's been given a trust, right? And he's been asked to carry out this trust with money, right? Imagine someone who collects charities, fundraising organization, right? Or someone who's been given a certain task to take care of the needs of people who meet a certain criteria, right? That person, the way they carry and deal with that money, exemplifies a very difficult form of da'wah. Why? Because it relates to one of my desires. It's very easy to convince someone, hey, you know what, it's a good thing, join a soup kitchen, right? And go to feed the homeless. It doesn't take much. It doesn't take much to convince someone that it's a good idea to participate in a soup kitchen once in your life. You know what is difficult to convince someone? When the desire for more wealth clouds their judgment and they're still called to be ameen, right? So that's why one form of da'wah that's not really considered is how people manage their money and deal with each other in business transactions. The Prophet ﷺ tells us in the hadith, الْبَيِّعَانِ بِالْخِيَارِ مَا لَمْ يَفْتَرِقَا, that the buyer and the seller have the option to rescind the sale as long as they're still discussing and deliberating. So then the hadith says, فَإِنْ صَدَقَا وَبَيَّنَا بُورِكَ لَهُمَا فِي بَيْعِهِمَا. If they're honest and they clarify everything relating to the sale, then they'll find barakah. If they lie and they conceal, then the blessings of this transaction will be void and gone. Right? So, can I possibly, perhaps, give some form of da'wah with the way I deal with my desire for money? Right? Allah says to us in the Quran, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. You'll never truly be a benevolent people until you give from that which you love. Right? It's really, really difficult for me to manage my desires and my whim when it comes to dealing with something as precious as my assets. So, da'wah is something that is this holistic, all-inclusive types of things. When it's something in my favor or against me. When it's something that I desire and something that's not really desirable to me. When it's something that relates to family and when it's something that relates to complete strangers. When it relates to behaviors, words, actions, attitudes, perceptions, everything that we do has its impact on those around us. And all of that relates to da'wah in one way or another. How many people have been guided to Islam through da'wah of merchants? Go look at how Islam spread in the Far East historically. So it's not always about grabbing a mic, right? It's not always about grabbing a mic. It's about something that embodies you and defines you. Something you embody and something that ends up defining you, every aspect of you. So yeah, I could give amazing da'wah as a merchant, as a Muslim merchant. I can give amazing da'wah as someone who's an honest and trustworthy person who serves others in different capacities. It's all forms of da'wah. I need to transform the meaning of da'wah to all of that. Yeah, they're all behaviors in the end of the day. But do I really think of these behaviors? I need to. And I need to push myself to. We've gone for a full hour now. And I think that we actually just covered the subject good enough. So it's a good point for us to take a pause. But before we do that pause, does anyone have any comments or questions? Is that example of having good business practice an Of course. It's an example. He said is that practice of doing good in business a part of me keeping the covenant with the people. Yeah, I have a covenant with Allah and a covenant with people. And and by the way, people will look at how I deal with these things that are very deep and intimate with me, to see who I am as a person. Right? Don't tell me what you do when you're dressed in your religious garb and you're praying, bowing, prostrating. Tell me what you do with your dollar. How you treat your employees. Look, that's a form of da'wah. Someone who's an employer who has non-Muslim employees, they're going to look at that. They're going to see how has Islam transformed and affected, or has it, this person that I'm dealing with, right? Look, there's this question here. Did Islam spread primarily by da'wah or by the sword, as they claim? How do we respond to that claim? So did Islam spread by the sword? No, of course not. We don't believe that whatsoever. We don't believe that whatsoever. Islam spread, what does it mean when they say Islam spread by the sword? Were people ever compelled? So what the statement alludes to is that there was this very bloody, violent, brutal actions that were carried out to compel people to believe. That's what it means when you say Islam spread by the sword. But historically, is that true? Was it violent? Was it subjugating? No! You know who was subjugating? The Byzantine Empire. You know who was subjugating? The Crusaders. That was who was subjugating. Who do you think the Christians of Jerusalem were waiting for when they were waiting to give the keys to Umar al-Faruq? Why do you think that the religious body of Christians in Jerusalem celebrated the coming of Umar? Because they were subjugated by the Byzantines who ruled over them. Even though they were Christians themselves, they were subjugated by their Christian brethren. Go read history. Anyone who tries to tell you that, any Islamophobe or Orientalist who tries to convince you of that, we don't need to look very far. Muhammad ﷺ was the warmonger, right? Tell me who's the one who killed millions of people in the span of years, right? Tell me who killed millions of people. Muhammad's the warmonger. Did he make World War I, World War II? Is he the one who, subjugated nations with all of the firepower and military might that we see today? It's a nonsensical argument. It's funny because the same Western tradition that has caused so much bloodshed and terror more than any other time in human history in the past 100 years, there has never been such loss of life throughout. Who's responsible for that? Islam? No, we know who's responsible for that. No. We should never allow someone to make us feel inferior as though they have the moral high ground. Be clear. Let's go back to the numbers. All right? Muhammad's a warmonger. Islam spread by the sword. Let's compare the numbers. What war has Islam ever waged that has led to the bloodshed and the brutality that some of the wars that have been waged throughout the past centuries, right? Whether you look at the Mongols, who were the Mongols? Were they Muslims? Were they Muslims when they, pillaged and destroyed and killed people? Look at the crusades that were waged. Were those Muslims, right? No, we need to be very clear on history, right? Islam's not responsible for the death of whether 40,000, 60,000 people by the sword in any of its battles. That didn't happen, right? So, of course, it's spread by da'wah, Now, of course, is there anything to say about, there being any significance for there to be a strong state and a strong system of governance? Yeah, of course. People need that's why the Quran was guided, or the Quran was preserved by the system of governance that surrounded it and became Islamic civilization. Yeah, people need that. لا ينفع الناس فوضى لا سرات لهم, right? ولا سرات إذا جهالهم سادوا, as they say. وَالْبَيْتُ يُبْتَنَى لَهُ عُمُدٌ وَلَا عِمَادَ إِذَا لَمْ تُرْسَ أُتَادُ. It's not, you can't have a society without a system of governance. Yeah, there needs to be law. I'm not saying that. Yeah, there needs to be some strength, the element of strength. If what you mean by the sword, strength, okay, but that's not what the statement alludes to. No, it's one of da'wah. Now, anyone else have questions or comments that they'd like to ask directly? Yes. So actually, this is talking about the end of times. The end of times, which, by the way, we see, signs of that in our reality, whether our reality is of the end of times or not. But look, what does that look like practically? The Prophet ﷺ tells us another hadith that you will see رويبضة. What is a رويبضة? He says الرجل التافه الذي يتكلم في أمر العامة. This is some insignificant ignoramus who has somehow gotten hold of public discourse and can actually influence the direction of society. Right? Tell me you haven't seen that. Right? So these are signs and symptoms, right? So when people of reasoning retreat away from the direction of society, that's when you get a lunatic like Netanyahu, who sends bombs and missiles on residential areas. He's a lunatic, right? He's a lunatic. That's what he is, right? So when people of reasoning retreat away from the directions and the decision-making process of society, that's when you have this neo-Nazi form of politics of today, that anyone who is sponsored and aided by AIPAC somehow gets to the highest position of power, and you'll find that the progressed world somehow celebrates this idea of killing children and blowing up buildings, right? That's what happens, right? What happened to all of that Western philosophy and civilization and all that, the universities and institutions and infrastructure? Where did it go? How did lunatics get power like that, right? That's what happens. Hitler's not so long ago, and we have new forms of Hitler today, right? So, anyway, that's what I'd say to that. So, does anyone else have a comment or question? Any comment or question? There's another one that's here. People get uncomfortable discussing religion in these times. What's a wise way to approach this, both among Muslims and non-Muslims? Look, like I said before in the beginning, da'wah is an art form. I should not be too uncomfortable to share my identity and my values and my principles. But I also should not shove it down people's throats. I should give people a chance to learn things, grow into things. I should not give people ultimatums and pressure them, hey, look, if you don't do that, you're doomed. That's a bad form of da'wah. Let people learn to love you. Penetrate their hearts before you try to impose yourself as an authority on them. That's what the Prophet ﷺ did. Again, it's this long drawn out process. It's not an easy thing. Prophet ﷺ was commanded to take this approach of that addresses the hearts of people for 13 years in Mecca. The longer part of the seerah was dedicated to building iman in the hearts of people. And the Prophet ﷺ went to Medina only with dozens of followers. 13 years versus 10 years. How did it exponentially rise within 10 years? Allahu Akbar. Right? So that's something to think about. It's not about the numbers, and it's all about the approach, and it's all about it being divinely inspired. Right? So it's about the approach. I need to think about that. It's not about the numbers. There are prophets who will come on the Day of Judgment having only a small group of followers. Some of them will come only having 2 followers or 1 follower. I can't guarantee that anyone... Look, the Prophet ﷺ himself, those nearest and dearest to him did not believe, right? Like his uncle Abu Talib, right? So it's an art form. The best thing I could do is to try to win over the hearts of people so that I could position them to best accept the message that I have to carry. So that's what I'm saying. That's what I would say to that question. There's a lot more questions here, and we're at 9:30 right now. So we've been going for an hour and 10 minutes. I'm going to stop here, inshallah. The remaining questions, I'll address them, inshallah ta'ala, in the WhatsApp group. Jazakumullah khair. Subhanakallah wa bihamdik. Nashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.